Hello again to any parents or carers or students listening to this revision video. My name is Mrs. Howell. I'm the Assistant Principal for Teaching and Learning, and today is session 3 in a series of sessions and walkthroughs on revision tips and techniques. This slide is just a reminder of what we've covered so far and what we're going to cover in today's session. If you haven't watched sessions 1 or 2 yet, it's a good idea to listen to them. They're both fairly short, about 10 minutes long, but they are in this order for a reason. Starting with retrieval and memory, so we understand why we're doing revision in this way, using retrieval as a very, very effective technique. Then looking at Lightner flashcards and how they activate that idea of retrieval and spaced and interleaved study. And then today we are looking specifically at Cornell note-taking and how to use that as a resource for self-quizzing. The fourth and final session will look at bringing everything together, using study buddies to help with your revision and different types of graphic organisers. If you've watched sessions 1 and 2, you'll know all about this analogy of working in long-term memory. This is a quick reminder then of the benefits of retrieval. The reason I keep including this slide and going back over this is because it will feel hard and frustrating sometimes to retrieve from memory. And sometimes you will want to just look at the answer and make things easy. So I'm giving you these constant reminders of why retrieval is the most effective strategy for revision and getting that information into long-term memory so it's at your fingertips in the exam. So that analogy of working memory like a school bag, you can store limited amount in there, but it's easily accessible. And what we're doing when we retrieve is we're pulling items from our long-term memory, a bit like a bookshelf. Lots more items stored there, but they're a bit harder to locate, which is why retrieval can feel difficult. But remember that the more you practice retrieval, the easier it will be. On to today's revision technique then, Cornell note-taking. There is here a short 3-minute video, so after you've listened to today's session, you might want to go onto YouTube and have a watch of that and remind yourselves of how to take Cornell notes. It's there anytime you want to go back and refresh your memory. So on the other side of this slide, you can see a template for Cornell notes. You can see that you put your title at the top of a fresh piece of paper and then notes in the main part of the page and cues down the margin to help you retrieve those notes. You then write a summary at the bottom. I'm going to show you what this looks like on the next slide. Here you can see a really good example of a completed Cornell Notes template on metallic bonding. You can see that it's organised so that each section is clearly laid out with numbers, cues and notes. And the cues are numbered so you can see those cues very, very clearly. This student has even red penned the important words and phrases to remember, and they've supported their notes with relevant diagrams and images as well. In this case, the summary is actually in bullet points, and it's absolutely fine to do that. And it might vary from subject to subject whether you want a full sentence or whether you want bullet points as your summary. I would say for your summary though, it does need to be relatively short, no more than about 3 bullet points or 3 sentences. We are now going to go through step by step how to create Cornell notes. First of all, as with flashcards, find a trusted resource. It might be a textbook, it might be a revision booklet, or perhaps even a trusted, credible website such as BBC Bitesize Revision. If you are revising using a website, however, please check with your teachers that it's the correct exam board and specification. Step 2 then, once you have selected your section of text, read it carefully and jot down key points and important information. Because you are making notes, you can use abbreviations as long as you know what these abbreviations mean. So if you have a look at the bullet points the notes that I've made, I have used an abbreviated form of and in the first bullet point, and I have used an abbreviated form of with, the W with the slash, in the third bullet point. And like I say, that's fine. It does make note taking a little bit easier and quicker, but you need to know what those notes mean. So use of abbreviations is fine. Just be careful you have a key or something that reminds you of what those abbreviations mean. And I'll show you an example of this on the next slide. Here is an example of possible abbreviations you could use when taking notes. Some of the most useful ones are e.g. to mean for example. You'll all be familiar with that as an abbreviation. You could use an asterisk or a star for more important information, so to signal the importance of that particular information to yourself. You could use arrows to show a cause, an increase or a decrease. But you can use any of these as appropriate for different subjects and topics. Little word of warning though, if you're not used to using abbreviations and you think they could confuse you, then don't worry about that. You can take effective notes without using them at all. So just decide how confident you feel using some of these as keys. If you don't feel confident, then miss out abbreviations completely and just write in full sentences. Step 3 then, once we've got our notes, we need to use these notes to create questions that we're going to use as cues. That just means that we can look at our questions later and attempt to answer them, so attempt to retrieve the important information. If you're not sure how to write questions, then think about your question stems. Words like what, how, why, where, when, and who will help you create those relevant questions to go alongside your notes. Remember, the questions should match up to your notes as the answer to those questions. Step 4, use your questions to write cues and keywords in the margin. So your cues can take the form of questions. Your cues can also take the form of keywords and phrases. And I'll show an example of a completed template in a couple of slides' time, so you can see what I mean by combining questions, words and phrases in the margin as your cues. Final step then in creating Cornell notes, step 5. You've made your notes, you've written your cues to go alongside those notes. Now you're going to write a short summary at the bottom of the page. If you're not sure how to create a summary, you could use prompts like what, who, when, why, and how to put that summary together. Again, as I said earlier, keep your summary fairly short, no more than 3 sentences or 3 bullet points of the key most important information. Another way you can create a summary is by using delete, substitute, keep. So what this means is you cross out the less important information. You might substitute 1 or 2 words where appropriate, and then you use what you are left with to create your summary. So again, you can see I've shown you an example here and how that is reduced down to a short 2-sentence summary in this case. Okay, so now you have created your high quality notes. Here comes the really important bit. Please don't just put these notes to one side and never look at them again. We're going to use them for regular self-quizzing. So cover up the notes section and your summary as well, and try to retrieve this information from memory. Now this is what we call cued recall. If you remember back to the first session where we talked about the retrieval continuum, because you have got your cues in the form of questions, words or phrases to help you remember that key information. So always when we're retrieving, we're either going to say it out loud or we're going to write it down. Cornell notes, just like flashcards, is a great one to do with a study buddy, whether that be a member of your family, a friend, someone from school, because they have the answers there. So actually, if somebody is quizzing you rather than you self-quizzing, then there's no chance of them not being able to help you arrive at the right answer, because the right answers are there in that note section. So you absolutely don't need to do this with a partner, so don't worry if you don't have a partner to do this with. You can self-quiz by covering that information up. It's just as effective. But if you wanted to do this with a peer, with a family member, with a parent, with a carer, with a sibling, then you absolutely could use that method as well. Here is another example of a completed page of Cornell notes based on the plot of Macbeth. So this time we've just got questions. If you look down the cues margin, it's where, who, what, why questions to help elicit those answers. So this is another example of a resource where you could cover up your notes, cover up your summary, and try to retrieve all of those answers. Because this is the plot of Macbeth, it's all of that really important information that you need to be able to answer any question in the exam, really. You need this kind of knowledge at your fingertips. Quick reminder of the importance of corrective feedback. So as usual, for any information that you know was harder to remember, turn it into a flashcard. So you're using all these different revision methods to prepare yourself for exam success. It's really, really important to give yourself that corrective feedback, or to get that corrective feedback from a study buddy, parent, carer, whoever is quizzing you on the Cornell notes if you're not self-quizzing. In revision, making mistakes is a natural part of study, and it's not anything to worry about. In fact, making mistakes is really effective in avoiding making those same errors in the exam, and we learn a lot from mistake making. So as long as you are correcting those errors as you revise, that can actually be really, really useful, hence the importance of corrective feedback. At the end of a study session, just make sure you are making a note of what went well. So you can see my example here, easily remembered vocabulary on Macbeth's character, but what are the gaps, what are the areas you need to focus on next time? So couldn't remember these two terms, foil and equivocation, got a bit confused between Banquo and Macduff. So again, you would make flashcards out of that information, you would emphasise it in your next study session to go over again. I will finish this session the same way that we always do, by going over the ingredients for effective study. So it needs to be active, not passive. So when we're using our Cornell notes to self-quiz, covering up the notes section, using the cues to retrieve, that should involve some hard thinking, which means it's working, it's going to enter long-term memory. Metacognitive, that's what we just talked about with the corrective feedback. Make sure you give yourself time at the end of a study session to reflect on the successes and the areas that need a bit of further attention. Desirable difficulties means that, like I said, with active not passive, it should sometimes feel hard. And social, so we'll go back to this in the next session, because I will talk about how you can make use of study groups or study partners. And again, if you've watched the first two sessions, you will have seen my top tips, but in case you haven't, let's go over them again briefly. Make sure revision is little and often. Cramming is not effective, as we know, tempting as it might be. It's not going to help you out in the long run. Even if you're having a busy day and you can only fit in 5 minutes of flashcard quizzing, that's fine. Just make sure you are topping that knowledge up on a regular basis. Active, not passive, we know it should feel hard. Avoid those easy strategies like rereading and highlighting. Again, tempting, however, they're not going to help you to remember in the long term. Revision can be social. Again, we'll go back to this next time. Dialogue around revision is great, so even just a quick conversation with parents, with carers, with siblings around how your revision is going. And revision well-being, please make sure you have a bottle of water with you at all times, that you are getting a good amount of sleep, that your diet is healthy, and that you put technology to one side. So again, tempting as it might be, our phones are unhelpful, they distract us, and even just having music on in the background just means your attention is split and you want your full focus to be on that study session, no matter how short it is. So even if you're just going to study for 20 minutes, put those distractions to one side and make sure your full focus and attention is on that revision and on that study session. I'll speak to you again in session 4 when we will start to look at the use of study buddies and graphic organisers. Good luck for now.